Hi, Scarlet Marvel here. And Marvel's Phase 5 is off to an enjoyable, if bland, start with Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. The newest entry to the MCU provides unique visuals and grand spectacle throughout, but struggles to create a compelling story through its underdeveloped characters and themes. The film revolves around two pairs of Ant-Man and the Wasp. The current pair, Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne, and the originals, Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym, in addition to Scott's daughter, Cassie Lang, and the antagonist, Kang the Conqueror. Before we keep going, have you seen Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Most of the movie takes place in the quantum realm, where the Langs and Pym Van Dynes get separated, resulting in Kang using Scott to recover the power core that Janet previously destroyed. The Ant family then work with the Quantum Realm rebels and a colony of highly evolved ants to take down Kang before he can escape into the multiverse, in a massive Star Wars-like climax. Scott and Hope seemingly kill Kang by destroying his power core, and the Ant family is able to return home. But Scott is left with paranoia over Kang's warning that something worse is yet to come. Now, this short plot synopsis doesn't exactly reveal the flaws in the script. The script clearly tried to do too much, without giving much time for developing any of the characters, themes, or individual storylines. The movie moved from moment to moment way too quickly, not allowing any of them to feel impactful or truly developed, with a few exceptions, particularly the interaction of Kang and Janet in the flashbacks. In fact, long stretches of the movie would feel unimpactful or irrelevant, such as the early middle section of the movie, when the Ant family is separated and before Kang appears. These moments introduce many new characters and many plot points that don't really add much to the movie. For example, Bill Murray's Krylar, who is just kind of there to create a little bit of conflict between Janet and Hank that doesn't really go anywhere. In fact, just about nothing changes from the start of the film to the end of the film, which is made more obvious by Scott returning to his regular routine that looks almost identical to the beginning of the film at the end of the film. There's only an added paranoia at the end, but otherwise, nothing's really changed. While the script is definitely quite flawed, I felt it nailed one thing down quite well in particular: the tone. This is a much more serious film than past Ant-Man films, and even most MCU films. But it still has humor sprinkled throughout, especially with characters like MODOK and Veb. And I personally felt that this was very well balanced. Although, I will say that mileage will likely vary depending on your individual sense of humor, as some jokes are repeated quite a bit, and if you just don't find it funny, then you'll probably never find it funny. That being said, I found it funny, so I felt it balanced out quite well with the serious moments that were brought on mainly through Kang and the interactions he had with characters. A superhero film needs action scenes, of course. And I thought this was kind of a mixed area for Quantumania, as there were simply not enough action scenes throughout the film, with the first couple action scenes being incredibly short on top of it all. But I thought the finale delivered on action, with really exciting moments for basically every character, even Janet and Hank. And it also included my favorite maybe my favorite action moment in all of the Ant-Man films, but definitely in this one, where the ant army takes on Kang. Very exciting. In fact, let's move on to talk more about the ending. I'm quite conflicted on the ending, as truthfully, I really enjoyed it when watching it in the theater. But thinking back to it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense in some spots. The ending escalated rather quickly and a bit conveniently, as the Quantum Realm rebels, who we had not seen for a good chunk of the movie at that point, just casually decide to risk their lives in battle just because of a speech that an outsider gave in Cassie. It's a bit convenient, but hey, it's all good fun. After all, what I really enjoyed most about the ending was the spectacle of it all. There was just so much going on, and it was just all good fun throughout. I especially enjoyed that the ants remain the heroes of the Ant-Man franchise, having a pretty much surprise appearance at the end as a highly advanced civilization of ants, taking down Kang. I also thought it was clever to make Hank the one to really take down Kang in that moment as the original Ant-Man, who hasn't had too big of an action moment yet in the MCU. Some other moments I really enjoyed were, surprisingly, the battle between Cassie and MODOK, which I felt was really a full circle moment from the first Ant-Man movie. I also really enjoyed the battle at the end, the one-on-one fight between Kang and Scott, and especially the moment that Hope saves Scott, as it really shows the importance of them being partners. It's not just Ant-Man, it's not just the Wasp, it's Ant-Man and the Wasp. However, that moment also came probably my biggest issue with the finale. So, in the moment that Scott and Hope remained in the quantum realm and the portal closed, I truly thought that they would be stuck. I felt the repercussions for a brief moment, and it really felt grand, like a repercussion that was worthy of how grand the movie was up to that point. But then, without really explanation, Cassie's able to reopen the portal and undermine any of the tension and the stakes that were present for just a brief moment. And I just really wish that they would have trapped them in the quantum realm. That would have been something really emphasize the high stakes of the situation. And I feel like it would have been a change, as like I said earlier, there really weren't any changes from the start of the film to the end of the film. And at the very end, as I alluded to earlier, I'm not really that big of a fan of the moment where Scott returns to his day-to-day life, as it felt a bit tacked on and pretty much just established that Scott is paranoid now, despite nothing else really changing. And it's that second part that I'm not a fan of. It just kind of emphasized that next to nothing changed in this movie. After a really exciting grand finale, then it's just back to normal routine with a little bit of paranoia. And I think maybe I was just soured by the previous moment that was lost, like the chance to have them stuck in the quantum realm. And I just didn't really enjoy the final 30 seconds of the movie. But that being said, even though I have issues with the way that the finale's set up, I really enjoyed it. Seeing Giant Man, seeing Cassie go giant for the first time, seeing Hope come out of the portal and rescuing Scott, proving that they're partners. Of course, seeing the ant army, and even seeing Janet have some action moments in there. It was all just really cool and good fun. I think that's really what was the big part of it. It's just a lot of fun. As we all know, the ending isn't really the ending for a Marvel movie, as there are end credit scenes that give us peeks at what's coming up. And these end credit scenes were really cool. Both focused on Kang, or more specifically, the variants of Kang, with 4 main variants being introduced through the end credit scenes. And I really enjoyed seeing the ways that Jonathan Majors is bringing each of these variants to life in different ways from either He Who Remains or Kang in the very same movie. And I just really enjoyed seeing that there is a direction. There's a really exciting direction that the MCU is taking. And I'm really personally very excited to see all of these variants who I've read in the comics before come to life on screen. However, I will say that coming out of the theater, I noticed some murmur of confusion, probably from non-comic fans who may not really understand the whole variant thing yet. And so I wonder if maybe I was extra excited for that because of my comic book background, and that maybe that's not something that would excite all people. However, that being said, I think people are gonna probably get on board as we keep moving forward, as Jonathan Majors' performance, even in those 30-second end credit scenes, was stellar. Additionally, it was fun to see Loki and Mobius again in the second end credit scene, as it gives us an idea of exactly where to expect Kang next, and exactly what the next big project connecting to Kang Dynasty in the future is going to be. Next, I want to talk about some of the themes and characters, and what worked for me and what didn't work. First, the theme of family. So, of course, the main cast is pretty much an extended family, but it's really split into 2 camps, the Langs and the Pim Van Dynes. So let's start with the Langs. The relationship of Cassie and Scott started off with some interesting conflict, with a difference in morality. But by the end of the movie, the issue appeared resolved without an actual resolution. Although, I will say that their chemistry was strong throughout the film, and Cassie remained really solid motivation for Scott, and brought out some deep emotion in Paul Rudd that we haven't really seen before. Moving on to the Pim Van Dynes, the relationship of Janet, Hank, and Hope was enjoyable to watch, but it was rather shallow, as it focused pretty much exclusively on the secrets that Janet was holding against her family. But once she revealed them, there was really nothing left that of interest within the family, and there wasn't even a true resolution as to, will she continue to hold secrets? Will she be a more open person? We didn't really see a continuation of that storyline, which maybe comes in a future movie, but within this movie, we really didn't see any evidence of a change in the family. Now, overall, I would say there wasn't enough emphasis on the strength of the overall family, the connection between the Pim Van Dynes and the Langs and the family they formed together. It was really just 2 parts in 2 different storylines that neither one really went anywhere with their theme. That being said, I do think it's really interesting that at the end of the film, Kang is not defeated by just Scott. He's not defeated by just Hope. He's defeated by Scott and Hope, who are the unison of the Lang and Pim Van Dynes. So that is a moment that sort of brings the theme of family together. Maybe it would have been more powerful if the whole family had something to do with it, which I think is emphasized a bit by the fact that every member of the family had a key role to play in the final battle. but in the final battle, that final moment with Kang, it's just the two of them, which emphasizes more their partnership than really the family element of the movie. And if we are talking about partnership, their partnership is only really addressed in 2 or 3 moments in the film. The film really focused more on family, and the fact that the ending didn't emphasize that kind of showed me that the theme didn't really go anywhere. It didn't go anywhere deep, at least. The next big theme is time, which focuses on 3 characters, really. Kang, Janet, and Scott, who are all characters who have lost time at some point in their lives. However, I will say that this connection between the 3 of them is underdeveloped and really only explored between Kang and the other 2. There would have been some really interesting potential in the fact that Scott and Janet have both lost time with regards to their daughters. But we never saw that even addressed once. Instead, the issue is with Kang, where both Scott and Janet choose to sacrifice time for others, with Janet sacrificing time in the flashbacks, and Scott sacrificing time at the end of the film, when he's willing to sacrifice his life to stop Kang. On the other hand, Kang proves throughout the film that he's willing to sacrifice others for time. He wants to control time. He doesn't really want to use his time for good, which is what both Janet and Scott are willing to do. I wish that this theme would go a little deeper, and I'm sure that it will in the future, seeing that Kang is more than likely going to return. But I also really wish that they took this opportunity to connect Janet and Scott between their shared lost time. I think that would have made for some really interesting conversations between the two, in a movie where, honestly, they don't interact very much, surprisingly. The next theme I almost didn't include here, but it is a theme in the film. Fighting oppression. So now, I almost didn't include this because it's not really a theme that's explored in any way, shape, or form that's deeper than extreme surface level, what you can see on the screen. This theme is mainly explored with Cassie and the Quantum Realm Rebellion, with this more or less being Cassie's morality and her difference, and the difference between her and Scott. With, at the start of the film, Cassie being in jail for protesting, and Scott reprimanding her for it. Of course, later on, Scott more or less takes this back, without actually stating it, but more so making a joke about being in jail again. But Cassie does continue on this path, with a big speech that brings the Quantum Realm Rebellion into the final battle. That being said, we don't really know much about the Quantum Realm Rebellion, so it comes across as just Cassie's character trait, and it's not really developed any more than Cassie is a character who will fight for oppression, will always fight for the little guy, as Scott puts it in the film. And I really think that there's potential for some exploration of these Quantum Realm characters and why they're rebelling, what they're rebelling against truly, what did they experience that made them want to need to rebel. But the film itself doesn't go deeper than just the final battle, which, like I said, is a lot of fun, but it really does a disservice to the theme of fighting oppression. Moving on to characters. Pretty much every character in this film is a joy to watch on screen, either because they're hilarious, their performance is amazing, or they're just charismatic in the role. However, It's a massive flaw of the film that not a single character, with maybe one or two exceptions, has any character development. Let's start with Ant-Man, Scott Lang. As always, Paul Rudd is excellent in the role, with strong comedic timing, and in this movie, some very powerful serious moments that we haven't really seen out of Paul Rudd in this role before. This is especially true in his relationship with Cassie, where we see him play a father who has lost time and is grieving this time, but also trying to get to know his daughter at a new age. This brings out moments of fear, moments of anger, moments of caution that we haven't really seen before, and especially in his moments fighting against Kang, we see his seriousness come through in powerful ways. His performance is truly excellent, probably the second or third best in the film. Additionally, he has some good scenes with Wasp, but their relationship is weirdly forgotten for large chunks of the film and then brought up for some powerful moments that then get forgotten again for other large chunks. It's a bit strange, and I'll go into it more when I go over Wasp. But next, let's go over Cassie. Kathryn Newton as Cassie is a lot of fun. She's a very fun young hero, though a bit underdeveloped, as we see her pretty much start as a hero in the film. We don't really see her come into her own yet, and maybe that's a journey that is coming in the future, although she already seems to be a pretty competent hero at this point in time. The most interesting aspect that Cassie brings is a unique morality and need to fight for the little guy that is both inspired by Ant-Man and an inspiration for Ant-Man in this film. I think Cassie could have been developed a bit more in this regard, as I think it's a really interesting point for her and Ant-Man's differences, but their similarities at the same time. Her relationship with Paul Rudd's Ant-Man is truly at the core of this film for large chunks of the runtime. And I think that she brings out really strong emotion in Paul Rudd, which is excellent, though I will say Kathryn Newton could probably work on improving her emotion in some of the more desperate moments. Otherwise, I thought Cassie was an excellent new addition to the Ant-Man franchise. Next up is Evangeline Lilly as the Wasp, who, despite being literally in the title, Ant-Man and the Wasp, is forgotten for large chunks of the movie. It's really strange, but she's likely the main cast member with the least to do throughout the film. Of course, she has some really excellent moments, saving Scott a couple times in the movie. And these are really some of my favorite moments in the film. But that's really all she gets to do. Otherwise, the only other thing she really does in the film is push Janet to open up with her secrets. But she takes a more passive role in this, not really pushing her until halfway through the film, and when Janet ultimately does reveal her secrets. And this really just leaves the Wasp hanging in the background for large chunks of the film, which is so strange, truthfully. There were rumors I saw that there was a scrapped plot line for the Wasp somewhere, so maybe her role was just cut down because of that. But that being said, she was a really powerful character when she did appear in the 3 moments that she was allowed to shine. However, There was another Wasp in this film who was allowed to shine even brighter. This is Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne. She is also either the second or third best performance. It's between her or Paul Rudd, honestly. And she really brings something powerful to the role. She is an amazing actress who brings a subtlety, but a deep subtlety, where her expression just says so much at any point that you're watching her, without even giving lines many of the times. Not to mention, she has excellent chemistry with Kang. Definitely the best in this cast. Probably the best acting moments in this film come from her and Kang's interactions together. She really shines as the main Wasp of this film. That being said, her compelling story doesn't really go far once her secrets are revealed. And like I've mentioned for the other characters so far, she doesn't really change by the end of the film. There is just no development, truthfully. And I feel like there was a lot of potential. And I'm excited to see what Michelle Pfeiffer does next, because Janet Van Dyne has potential to be a really great hero in the MCU moving forward. Last of the Pym Van Dynes is Hank Pym, who, like Evangeline Lilly, Michael Douglas doesn't get a lot of room to do much in this film. Despite that, he also gets a couple big moments to shine. And the little ant jokes that he makes throughout the film even come back in a big way when, at the finale, he actually gets to be the one to first defeat Kang with his massive ant army. It's also interesting that while we don't see this development, it's more off-screen. Hank is definitely a very different character in this film to how he's been portrayed in pretty much every other film in the MCU that he's appeared. He's a lot more jovial and just more friendly with every other member of the cast. I was a bit conflicted on this at first because I felt maybe this was just too different from Hank Pym. But then I thought about it. He has his family back, so this is really an expected change. He even has a new protege in Cassie Lang. And so I thought this was a welcome change that, like Cassie, happened off screen, but it was nice to see something different from him. And like I said, he had some surprising moments in this film that really allowed him to shine, even though, like Evangeline Lilly's Wasp, he was in the background of the film for large chunks. Next up is the big one. Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror. Easily, Jonathan Majors gives the best performance in this film, elevating every single scene that includes him. That being said, Kang is still underdeveloped, relatively underwhelming, and purposefully underpowered. Now, these aren't necessarily flaws, as Kang is going to be further developed in the future, but for someone who is not necessarily super invested in what's coming next, it just kind of doesn't work for this film. He is defeated relatively easily by a small group of Avengers instead of, the whole team that he's eventually supposed to defeat. And we still don't really understand his motivations at all. All we really know is that he's a very cartoony villain that just wants to conquer everything because that's what he likes to do. I'm sure there's something deeper that's coming, but at this point in time, it's just not there. And it truly was a bit underwhelming, despite the fact that Jonathan Majors worked wonders with the material he had, providing endlessly enjoyable scenes and a menace that has not been seen since Thanos. Additionally, he has really excellent chemistry with pretty much the entire cast, but especially Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne, with their scenes being standouts. I'm excited to see what Jonathan Majors does in the future with this role, but for now, Kang is underdeveloped, and I am excited to see what comes next, with the end credit scenes showing that Jonathan Majors is taking this role very seriously and giving each variant very specific mannerisms and tone of voice that I'm sure the future of Kang is going to be grand. Now, the last individual character I'm going to talk about is MODOK, who surprisingly really worked for me. He was pretty much just humor throughout the film, which makes me think he's going to be a hit or miss character, where you're either really going to like him if you find his jokes funny, or you're really going to dislike him if you don't find any of the jokes involving him funny. That being said, I didn't really like his death scene. I felt like he was wasted, and I also felt like that was the only moment where there was a long moment of humor that I felt overstayed its welcome, as it was right after Kang was defeated, and then we just spend this seemingly long segment of time just focusing on MODOK dying as an Avenger, in his words, which is funny at first, but it just takes a while. Additionally, I didn't like that they killed him. I felt that MODOK had potential in the future as a fun character to stick around, and now that's just not going to happen. Granted, we're in the multiverse saga, so I guess they can always pull another MODOK in from another universe. Additionally, MODOK's interestingly the only character to, in my opinion, have an actual character arc, which is kind of a mini one, but Cassie inspires him as well, allowing him to be a hero and help in the defeat of Kang. Of course, this is how he dies, but it's an interesting moment of redemption that I honestly didn't expect at all, and it adds something a little deeper to a character who is really just comic relief throughout the film. Also, because I know people are gonna talk about it, I didn't really mind the VFX on MODOK. Yeah, it looks uncanny, but that's kind of just how the character is. So, it worked for me. Since I mentioned costumes, I also want to briefly talk about some of the other costumes in this movie. First, my favorite costume was the stunning, comic accurate Kang the Conqueror costume, which just looked excellent at all points in the movie. No notes there. And I also want to point out the fact that the three Ant-Man suits, I guess, the Ant-Man, Wasp, and Cassie Lang suit, were all really vibrant, and I honestly think they're big improvements on the costumes that they had in the past. Although, the one note I will say is that they occasionally would get lost in the quantum realm backgrounds due to having oddly similar color schemes. So particularly in the final battle, at times they would get lost, and especially because the action was all over. But otherwise, I really enjoyed the costumes and for everything, the quantum realm residents and our main heroes and villains. Since I mentioned the quantum realm, of course, I can't review this without talking about the quantum realm itself and the VFX used for it. Most of it was incredibly stunning, beautiful, and they used a variety of unique settings that truthfully don't look anything like things we've seen in the MCU before. The closest comparison I can think of is maybe Ego's planet in Guardians 2. Although even then, there are some settings that just look drastically different from that. I also thought the VFX were excellent throughout, with the exception of a few small moments, mainly when characters are running, that I noticed the VFX just looked like VFX, if that makes sense. It was clear that they weren't running in actual environments in those moments. But for the most part, I was incredibly impressed with how the quantum realm looked. And I read how they based the quantum realm on actual microscopic images, which I think is astounding. And I didn't get the chance to look at it yet, but I'd love to look at some comparisons between microscopic images that they may have used and what they actually ended up doing, because I think that's a really clever idea. Speaking of the VFX, I also want to talk about the cinematography a little bit. Overall, this was a relatively standard film for the MCU with regards to cinematography. Not a lot of really unique standout shots, with two exceptions. A few more exceptions, but two that I want to mention. The first one is in the final battle, when Giant Man is attacking Kang's army. He looks excellent, standing ginormous amongst a technically microscopic city. But it just looked really, really excellent. That was one of the few moments in this film where their powers really shined in ways that they did in the real world in past films. And the second moment I want to talk about, which is actually possibly my favorite moment in the film, is the moment where Ant-Man and the Wasp were trying to shrink the power core and were stuck in a probability storm, surrounded by hundreds of probable variants. And the visuals there were just amazing, really well done, and especially the moment where the Wasp grabs Ant-Man's hand and picks him up to bring him to the core, and you just see all of their hundreds of variants piled around them. Wow, that's an image that's unlike anything I've seen before, and it truly stuck with me. And I would even recommend going to see this movie in IMAX, if just for that sequence. But that shot is definitely the best shot. So because this is the third film in a franchise, within a franchise, I want to talk about its place in those franchises. So this film is incredibly different to past Ant-Man films. It honestly doesn't feel like it belongs within this trilogy. It feels more like its own thing, or a fresh start, rather. It lacks the low stakes and comedic heist elements that give the first two Ant-Man films their unique feel amongst MCU films. Instead, it feels like a standard MCU film due to the spectacle and grandiosity that puts it on an Avengers level. And honestly, it just doesn't really conclude any of the storylines that have been building up in the Ant-Man trilogy. It really feels like its own thing, its own fresh start. Which I guess is fitting, as it's the first film in Phase 5, which is in and of itself a fresh start. That being said, its place in the MCU seems to be mostly as a setup film for the future. It sets up the quantum realm with its residents and a deeper exploration of it, which matches up with the different realms and universes that we've seen in this multiverse saga so far. But most importantly, it sets up Kang, and through its end credit scenes, it sets up the Council of Kangs, which is definitely the future of the MCU. The Council of Kangs are definitely going to be the villains of the upcoming Avengers films, and maybe even this Kang, who is honestly probably secretly alive somehow, is also probably going to return. So this really was just a Quantum Realm and Kang setup so that we can get to Avengers Kang Dynasty and Avengers Secret Wars Beyond. Otherwise, none of the other characters or worlds was impacted in any major ways. The only other thing I think that should be mentioned with regards to setup in the MCU is the Young Avengers, as we didn't really see Cassie become a hero. She was already a hero at the start of this film, so it seems like they're full speed ahead to get the Young Avengers team set up and fighting villains, I guess. So it explains why Cassie was a little rushed in this film. And she's still enjoyable, which makes me excited to see her on the Young Avengers one day, which is actually one of my favorite superhero teams. So I'm excited to see that. So overall, yes, this film is mostly just set up for the MCU. Overall, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania does not come together in a satisfying way, due to disjointed elements that compete for screen time, leading to basically no development for its characters, themes, and plot lines. But, despite that, it is enjoyable throughout most of the film due to entirely good performances, some reaching excellent levels, as well as a compelling new world to explore, visually, that allows for big spectacle at times, and an exciting peek at the future of the franchise. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give this film a 6.5, as I truly cannot say it's a well-made movie, but it does have excellent elements, and at its worst, it's still highly enjoyable. That being said, people who feel burnt out from superhero films will have no real reason to watch this, as it's an incredibly standard superhero movie. But if that's what you enjoy, like me, then you'll definitely find something to like here. And I would recommend you check it out. Die-hard Marvel fans will especially not want to miss this entry, as due to the presence of Kang, it is set to be an essential viewing for the upcoming Avengers films. I hope you all enjoyed my first movie review. This was a slightly different style of video, as it was not strictly scripted like my past ones. If you enjoy this style of video, hearing my unfiltered opinions, then let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, feel free to check out any of the other Marvelous videos up on this channel already, such as the explanation as to how Phase 4 saved my life, and can save yours too, right over here. Or, if you want to know the history of Marvel's black superheroes, check out this video right over here. Until next time, bye!